I'm a sucker for scary camping stories. Nothing's quite as enjoyable as hearing about grown adults screaming like little kiddos in the middle of the woods. I hope you enjoy these allegedly true and scary camping stories. The first story is easily one of my favorites. Let me know which you enjoyed the most and where you plan to go camping in the future. Be sure to send me your stories for narration at darkstories.org and subscribe to all my podcasts at eeriecast.com. You can hear my new show, Freaky Folklore, hosted by Carmen Carrion, at that website. In fact, I have Carmen Carrion here today to help me narrate. Oh, and for those wondering about my health, the doctor's office visit went fine. I've got a clean bill of health, and I hope to stop bothering all of you with my health troubles in the future. Seriously though, thank you everyone for your patience and support. Now, let's begin. Uninvited Guest at the Campfire. From Yume 130794. Romania is a country where people might get kidnapped, murdered, disappear, and so on. My parents were legitimately afraid for me and were against the idea. I had to lie to them, saying that we would stay in a hotel near the Kozia National Park, so they would get off my back. Obviously, that's not what we did. Long story short, we had to travel from Bucharest to this park, which is around 200 kilometers in, 2 hours by train. We got our immense backpacks, everything we needed, and went on our way. Nothing really happened on the train, save for the fact that the train was overly crowded, all except for our compartment, which is really rare for Romanian trains. I was excited thinking that we'd have the whole compartment to ourselves. That didn't last long, though. At a certain point, a man entered our compartment, accompanied by a beautiful German shepherd. I love all kinds of animals, cats and dogs in particular. I usually find my way around all animals, even those that don't like people. But not this dog. No. This dog was otherworldly. He looked so stiff, as if he was a stuffed animal. He would listen to his owner's every single command. I was impressed by this, so obviously I began asking the man about his dog. After all, it would be a long and awkward trip in which to have complete silence. The man was exactly like the dog. He would not contribute to the conversation and would only speak to give commands to the dog. The little information I got from him was that his dog's name is Uci Gashul, which in Romanian means the killer. It's a very weird name to give a dog. In this particular example, we would use the English word as it is, not translate it to the Romanian word, and name the dog that. But I thought, to each their own. I asked him why such a scary name, and he bluntly replied, "This dog is trained to kill. It's the only thing he likes and is good at." Now, I personally consider that a dog will grow up to have similar personality to its owner, and most of the times I would judge people with dogs and how that animal reacts to the world and to his owner. But let me tell you, these two did not give me a good vibe. I brushed everything over, thinking to myself that maybe this guy is training his dog to hunt in the woods. Then I began thinking which woods are legal to hunt in our country. While I was thinking about that, the guy out of nowhere asks us if we are traveling to the Kozia National Park. That was surprisingly accurate, considering the only time we mentioned the place was in the train station long before we found our seats, and way longer before we even met this man. Again, I thought it was nothing because in my country, people who happen to go in the same direction will try to make small talk and guess where you're heading. Of course, you can just lie to keep safe of your destination or be honest. I took the honesty route, and I'm judging myself for that now. Never be too honest with strangers, or honest at all, after hearing this story. We confirmed we're going to that place, and we asked what else there is to see around. He began talking about the area, and well, considering we knew nothing about the place, we took it all in. He told us about the woods, the vegetation, the animals we might encounter, told us about a beautiful monastery right at the bottom of the mountain that we needed to climb, advised us to visit the Lotrishore waterfall and explore the caves behind it, and to try out the local restaurant. When this guy started talking about the wilderness and nature, his eyes glowed as if he was experiencing a pleasant memory. But he also grabbed his dog's collar from the neck. Squeezing it tight, the collar made a loud clink sound. What surprised me was that the dog made no move, no whimper, no twitch, nothing. Just like a stuffed animal. Anyway, we reached our destination and said our goodbyes. The man waved at us, and we turned away from him to head on our way. But I turned back around right away. I wanted to ask where exactly that restaurant was. But the man and dog were no longer there. Not just that, but also their luggage was gone. That creeped me out a bit, but who cares? We were too thrilled for our first camping experience. We began walking with our backpacks on us, 10 kilos each, and reached a tunnel digging into the mountain. It looked amazing, exactly like those horror movie tunnels, which, if traveled during the night, would make your hair stand straight up. Luckily for me, we traveled during the day. It wasn't a long tunnel. We could see the end, but by the time we got to the middle of it, we heard a whimper in the distance. It sounded like a dog crying in desperation for its life. We stopped. My boyfriend looks at me with his, "Oh no, you're not going to take that dog with us," type of face, and tries to convince me to take a different route. We don't. I hear the dog and I go right towards the sound. And in the middle of the road, I see this chubby puppy with lots of white and brown circle on his butt, crying so hard and lying on the cement, looking really hurt. It was as if he had been run over by a car. I freeze, thinking to myself that our trip is over. I have to save this dog. We call for him and he looks at us, pointy ears perking up. He gets up and, like a doofus, starts running desperately to us. He was alone and afraid. We called him Rudolph, and now he was our camping buddy. About 1 kilometer further, we find another puppy, probably his sister, which we dragged from the nearby river. It seems someone threw her in the river to kill her. All wet, cold, and hungry, of course we take her with us as well. So there we were, 10-kilogram backpacks each, 2 puppies at my chest, boyfriend with the map, trying to find a spot to camp the first night. We passed by the monastery the man in the train mentioned, but because we had these puppies, we couldn't enter inside the building. The priests wouldn't allow us. So we continued walking around the property, through the gardens, until we reached the base of the mountain we had to climb. I'd like to mention that these puppies were 2 tiny little brats, because the second you put them down and forced them to walk on their own, they would slam their butts to the ground and cry. Such drama. We walk and walk and walk until we decide to stop, as it was getting late, and I was starting to feel cold. We found a spot next to a small landmark type of cottage in the middle of the wood. We call it Trojenitsa. It's like a scouting post but for the church, where they place religious icons or a Bible, stuff like that, inside to bring good energy to the area. It belongs to the church. It wasn't like a house, it was basically a roof with 4 small walls and an opening, not a door. You could go in to hide from the rain, for example. There was an icon inside and a Bible with pages ripped from it. Curious as I am, I opened the Bible. I was really annoyed to see that people would write down their names in it, like couples do on the trees. But on one particular page, the words, "I will find you," stuck out. This was written in red ink. Again, I thought to myself that it was probably someone who wanted to scare travelers with silly messages. I put the book back and I gave it no second thought. We put up the tent, made the fire, and unpacked, making some food to eat. We fed the puppies, which were now cuddled up in our tent, and finally, darkness began to fall all around us. My boyfriend always kept the fire up every hour, because when it went off, it felt as if all the sounds in the woods were louder and closer to us than in reality. Soon it was 12 a.m. We're all in the tent cuddling to keep warm. The puppies wake up and they start to cry. I get up and unzip the tent, and I put them out to pee. They do their business, and I get them back in. They cry some more, and the smallest one starts to shiver. At the same time, I hear grunting from behind our tent. My boyfriend is up too. He can hear it as well, and our fire is beginning to fade. The moment he unzips the tent and steps out, the sound disappears into the woods. It sounded like a snake slithering through the fallen leaves on the ground, but with unimaginable speed. I ask him, "Was that a snake?" He says, up to this day, that he can't explain what he saw. But this is what he says: that it was a slithery figure with feet that made a snort-like sound when the light hit it. The puppies calmed back down after this creature ran off into the woods. We tried to go back to sleep after we reignited the fire. It's 3 a.m. when we wake up again, and the puppies are once again fussing. The fire's nearly dead. We clearly have no idea to put up a sustaining fire, we think to ourselves. My boyfriend gets up to search for firewood, and I get out as well. I stare into the dark, and I swear to God I hear whispering coming from between the trees. I look up at the sky, consider it's 3 a.m., and I hear birds being very loud and fluttering their wings. Now, I'm no expert in birds, but don't they usually sleep around this time? Well, these weren't. They were very active, very vocal, and very frustrated. I look at the fire and follow the red sparks popping out of it into the sky, and I become fascinated with something. The spark doesn't seem to die. It goes on and on, changing color from hellish red to green. This was very out of the ordinary for me, as it created an illusion hard to explain. It looked as if the fire sparks were going into the woods, creating a track for me, probably to follow. I kept looking after each spark to see when it burnt out, but none of them did. They would levitate, turn green, and flow into the woods. At that moment, I began to get goosebumps on my skin. The birds being agitated, the mysterious light pointing us to go deeper into the woods, and all the trees around us having eyes on them, by which I mean the trunks had distinguished shapes that looked exactly like eyes. I know this is nothing paranormal since someone explained that those shapes form when a branch is ripped from the root, and that's the shape that is left after. But there were so many of them, like hundreds of eyes all looking at the exact spot where we decided to camp, and all we had was that tiny religious landmark to mentally protect us. As I inspect my surroundings, I hear movement in one of the bushes in front of our tent, like 10 meters away from us. Obviously, I stand my ground but don't go near it. Suddenly, a dark, bent-over silhouette comes out of it, and half inside the bush, half outside of it, it stares at us. I call my boyfriend over, and we're both freaking out, wondering what it is. Is it a bear cub? A wolf? A pig? The creature shakes its head the same way a dog does after a bath, and I hear a distinguished clink, like a dog collar. My boyfriend manages to light up the fire really big, which scares this animal to run back into the woods, through the bush from which it initially came out. That calms us down, but not enough to close our eyes again for a while at least, during that night. Going back into the tent, after a while my boyfriend does fall asleep. And by then the puppies are sound asleep. But not me. I kept the zipper on the tent opened a little, just enough to have my eye peek through it, watching the previously mentioned bush. I think I spent a solid hour staring and falling asleep to that bush. All of a sudden, I hear a noise coming from that direction, and I immediately wake up my boyfriend, who's now peeking through the hole in complete darkness with me. What we saw next still haunts my dreams. From that exact same bush, we see a human head pop out and look towards our tent. Note that our peeping hole was small enough to not make it look like you were being watched from the inside of the tent. This head is slowly coming out of the bush, skin so white we thought it was a ghost. After that, a shoulder, and another shoulder, a full torso, a leg. Bit by bit, an entire man emerged from the bush, completely nude, lit by both the moon and our fire. What he did next was excruciatingly scary for me. He comes so close to our tent and begins to remove branches, rocks, from our fire, basically trying to extinguish and ruin our fire by dismantling it. This all happened like 2 to 3 meters from our tent. I look at the man with horror, because I recognized him, and now the clink I heard earlier from that animal is explained. It's the man from the train, with his dog too. I don't know if he followed us. I don't know if he just went the same route as us and found us and decided to stalk us, but this guy was there since 12 a.m. at least, because our fire would be dead every 2 to 3 hours. We'd be awakened by the sound of branches being cracked, rocks being moved, which we internally explained as animals crossing the land. After he successfully managed to put out our fire, he slowly crept back into the same bush, submerging into it bit by bit until only his head would be out, with a disfigured-looking mouth, looking like a moaning ghost. Yeah, you try going back to sleep after that. We didn't know what to do, so we just got back out, reignited the fire, lit ourselves some torches, and stayed near the campfire until the first rays of the sun came up. I admit I did fall asleep while sitting down next to the fire, and so did my boyfriend. But any small sound would wake us up. I was too afraid to go near that bush. I didn't need any answers or any explanations. I just wanted daylight so we could get the heck out of there. And we did. We packed our things and got the heck out of there. We had planned a 4-day camping trip, and this experience made us give up after the first night. It was a risk we did not intend to take. If that man followed us, or if it was just a coincidence, it was enough to ruin it all. As a conclusion to my story, and as advice to any first-time campers out there, never tell your location or even the area remotely close to your destination to strangers. You don't know where their minds take them and what they end up doing. Always stay safe. Always be aware of your surroundings and any changes that come to you under the form of sounds, movements, changes of temperature, and so on. Always find a way to protect yourself.
It had been in the middle of September when my family and I had decided to go boondock camping. For those of you who don't know what boondocking is when you're in the middle of nowhere, with no electricity, no running water, nothing but just you and nature. My family and I were all geared up to go camping, and we drove to the Hoosier National Forest. We were already in Indiana. As soon as we got there, we went ahead and set up our tent. My sister and I had decided to go gather up some firewood in front of the forest, and we brought our dog along with us. He was a medium-sized dog, great for protection. While my sister and I were gathering up wood, we were talking and laughing as girls do, when suddenly we heard what sounded like someone walking slowly behind us. We turned around and realized that there was no one there. My sister and I looked at each other, then looked at our dog, whose hair was standing up like it does when he goes into protective mode. I kneeled down and told my dog that it was just a squirrel running across another tree. But I knew that that was not what that was. I don't know if I said it to reassure me, my dog, or my little sister, who was very scared. It had soon become nighttime, when we were all in the tent snuggled and listening to music, while laughing and joking. It had been late at night when my mother and sister had fallen asleep, so it had to just be me and my dad, and we were still awake. When we heard what sounded like a woman screaming in pure pain, as if she were being murdered, or running away from someone, or even something worse. After hearing this, my dad and I rushed out of the tent to see what it was, but we didn't see anything. We figured it had been a panther or bobcat around us, so we had gone back into the tent and stayed up some more, just to make sure that everyone was safe. An hour and a half goes by, and my dad hears what sounds like a woman screaming again, except this time it is different. When we heard the scream, it was right by our tent, and then a few minutes go by, and it was on the other side of my tent, and then in a few more seconds, it was right behind my tent. Now I know enough about bobcats and panthers to know what they sound like and how fast they can move from one place to another. And whatever this is, it was no animal. This was no bobcat or panther this time like me and my dad had thought. My dad had grabbed his rifle, and I had grabbed my 7-inch bladed knife, and we rushed outside. My dad and I looked around using our flashlights that we had. My dog had come with us, and at once again, my dog's hairs were standing up. My dad and I had seen nothing, but we knew my dog was seeing something that we could not see, and that terrified me. My dad could see that I was terrified as soon as he saw nothing, but my dad saw my dog's hair standing up. After seeing his hair like that and not seeing anything, the air goes stiff and everything is dead silent. My dad cocks his rifle to scare something away if something was out there. But my dad and I had known better. We knew that there was no animal there. Of course, I think he did that to make me feel better and more safe. We had gone into the tent and my sister was wide awake with fear on her face. I asked what was wrong and she said she had heard whispering behind her. But how was that possible? She was in the tent. I reassured her everything was okay and to go back to sleep. So she did. The next morning, we all moved our tent closer to some other people who were boondock camping as well. The same thing happened that night, but much worse. My parents had gone for a walk to talk. My sister and I were in the tent reading our books. Out of nowhere, we hear. I looked at my sister in horror, because it was right beside her side of the tent. No sooner than I looked at her, we both heard this very, very loud scream right behind her, as if a lady was being murdered. It sounded like she was above my sister outside. My sister's eyes widened in fear, and she ran over to me. We waited for our parents to come back. They asked what was wrong, so we told them. We all stayed up until we saw the thin light of day, and then we packed up and left. We don't know what is in the forest that night, but we know it wasn't a bobcat or a panther. We did know one thing, and that was that we would never go back to the Hoosier National Forest ever again.
The Waheela and the Wendigo. From Michael. I'm a 31-year-old male named Michael. I'm part native, more specifically the Haida tribe of Alaska. Many of my people believe in the Waheela, a giant white wolf that can be good or bad, depending on your respect for wildlife. It is a guardian that protects people, but it will harm those who disrespect wildlife. Now that you have a brief understanding of what the Waheela is, on to the story. At the time, I had just turned 25 and went to go out camping with my friends. We planned to have a good night full of drinking and games. At around 11, most of us were wasted, besides me and my brother Charlie, being the only ones that weren't heavy drinkers. We were really sober. At the time, me and my girlfriend, now wife, were talking about how we were going to sneak away for some alone time. That's when we heard a loud yell coming from right in front of us. We both turned to find my friend Brad managing to slip and land face first onto a rock. He wasn't getting up. My brother got up and ran towards Brad, picking him up and checking his pulse to see if he was even still alive. We needed to get him to a hospital, just in case he had a concussion, and to treat any wounds before he gets infected. So my brother and everyone decided to drive him to the hospital, but I stayed back to pack everything up. Out of nowhere, I heard someone whispering my name. At first, I thought it was my girlfriend, who I figured decided to stay behind too. But that wasn't right. She was leading them to the hospital in her car. So, who was whispering my name? I ran to my car to grab the .45 I kept in the center console, then went back to picking everything up. But then I heard someone yelling for help. This time it was in a more distorted way, like if they were swishing nails in their mouth. As soon as I heard that yell, I knew it was a Wendigo. I felt like an idiot. They've been reported throughout the reservation, and now I was all alone, possibly being hunted by the thing. I run over to the fire pit, throwing more logs into it. A Wendigo should not come towards the light. I stayed there until the sounds of the forest came back, and I went back to packing up. But no sooner had I finished packing up, the forest went quiet again. This time, I bolted towards the fire when something pounced on my back. I stayed still and didn't dare struggle. I could hear something sniffing me. This thing freaking breathed on me, and its breath smelled rotten, as if it had just eaten sewage. Then I listened to it speak. Not afraid, too bad. That's when I felt a hot stinging sensation going through my arm. I felt its teeth sinking into my arm. I screamed and screamed as it bit into my flesh. I prayed that the spirits could help. I prayed that if I did die, someone would hunt this thing down and kill it. After a while, it quit biting my arm, but instead it flipped me over to where I faced it. It was pale, paler than the moon itself, eyes red with hatred and teeth dripping with my blood right onto my face. It looked at me, seemingly enjoying the fear I showed. It smiled at me, saying, "Fear." And then it screeched in my face. Through the horrid sound, I thought I heard something else, like a howl. and I think it heard it too, as it began to sniff the air. The sound then came again, a long and down-to-the-gut howl. The Wendigo's eyes changed. They no longer showed anger and hunger, but instead fear. It got off of me. Then I heard a growl, one that didn't come from the Wendigo. It came from right behind us. I looked and saw these beautiful blue eyes, but the eyes weren't of care, they were of hatred. The howl erupted again, coming from right where the creature was standing. I turned back to the Wendigo and it looked petrified. Something behind me began to walk. I turned, and it was truly a beautiful sight. Those blue eyes belonged to a solid white wolf, and though the eyes seemed angry, they were still quite majestic. The Wendigo screeched at it and tried to run away from it, but in a flash of white, just like what had happened to me, it pounced on the Wendigo's back and bit directly at the neck, twisting and pulling up. The Wendigo's body flew over me and rolled right next to the fire pit, but it never got back up. I looked at the body and saw the head was gone. I looked back at the Wahila, whose beautiful white coat was now splashed with bits of red and the mouth covered in a crimson fluid. The eyes of anger were now fixed on me, but it never did attack me. Instead, it walked over to the Wendigo, snatching up its carcass in its mouth and walking off into the woods. I could no longer see it. I sat there in shock, and then I began to cry as I realized my most desperate prayers had been answered. I crawled over to my car, grabbing my phone and dialing 911. I requested an ambulance. As I sat there fading in and out of consciousness, I heard the howl again, deep down to the gut, as everything went black. When I woke up, there was a blinding light in my eyes. The ambulance had finally arrived. I was placed on the stretcher and brought to the hospital. I think of this experience every time my birthday comes around. Now with my own kids, I teach them to respect wildlife and respect the spirits, as I believe if it wasn't for respect I showed for wildlife, I wouldn't be around to share this story. Never believe that we're on the top of the food chain, as there are things in this world that we will never comprehend. Take this warning. There is bad and there is good in the world, but in the end, respect both, because if you don't, you will not like the outcome.
I live in a smallish college town in northern Utah, sandwiched near Idaho, called Logan. My friends and I love to go camping up in the mountains to the east of town. There was one area we loved more than any called Temple Fork. We had explored the area extensively, as the town is small and there's not much to do. We loved to go hiking and shooting, and camping was oftentimes a weekend event. Even if it was just a quick overnight, that made things pretty easy since we usually kept our gear in our trucks. So we just needed to get food prior to heading out. It was Friday night, and we stopped and grabbed some small sausages, some Cheetos, and some Dr. Peppers prior to cutting up towards the mountains. The areas closer to the highway were typically well maintained, and the roads were very easy to traverse. So frequently you would get people who liked the idea of camping, those that had trailers but wanted to play loud music or watch movies. You know, enjoy the creature comforts in the wild. For us, we didn't like setting up a tent next to someone camping in a trailer. So we usually went deeper into the woods on the bad roads, where it was more backcountry. We got up there around 7 p.m. and found a site situated with its back to a hillside, surrounded and secluded by trees. Perfect. There would be no disturbing our evening with loud music. We set to work quickly as we had all camped a lot. Some guys set up the tent, others unpacked trucks, and a buddy and I started the fire. Shortly, we were all sitting around the fire as it was starting to get dark, just roasting the sausages and chatting. After about an hour of chatting, one of my friends told us to shut up. He thought he heard a branch snap up the hill. As the campsite was cloistered in trees, it was dark and there was no moonlight. We could only see what our lanterns and firelight had illuminated. We stopped and listened for a little bit, but we didn't hear anything, so we went back to talking. After only a couple of minutes, we heard what almost sounded like someone trying to quietly move through the brush towards our camp. Like you would hear a twig snap, but not like someone just marching down the hill. We stopped talking, and when we did, the noise stopped, almost like it was listening to us. At this point, we were a little nervous. We passed our theories to each other as to what it could be. There were mountain lions and black bears in this area, but how would it know to stop when we stopped talking? Mountain lions are a little skittish, but can be territorial. But we all doubted that it would be a mountain lion, because a mountain lion wouldn't approach fire and people. Mountain lions are typically pretty stealthy too, and don't like direct confrontation unless you confront them with their cubs. And a black bear wouldn't be smart or stealthy enough to sneak towards us. An elk, deer, or cow wouldn't bother being quiet. Was it a person stalking us? It didn't really make sense, as we hadn't seen a light or anything, and it was way dark. Someone walking through the dense underbrush through the pines would have a hell of a time getting to us without being able to be seen in the dark. We nervously went on talking with one ear peeled for our mysterious friend. Whatever or whoever it was got within 100 feet of the camp up the hill when we heard a really loud branch snap. I think they knew it when we knew it was there and lost all pretense of being stealthy. We were all young outdoorsmen, so usually camping included fishing or hunting the next day. So fishing rods, handguns, and rifles, and even our shotguns, were not an anomaly in our trucks. I ended up walking to my truck and grabbing my shotgun. I only had target pellets, but those can still do quite a bit of damage up close. We didn't hear it move any further. It almost seemed to be scoping us out. I racked around into my shotgun and fired into the air to see if that would get a response. Whatever it was, it tore up the mountains, not caring if we heard it at this point or not. It went from 100 feet away to several hundred in 30 seconds or less. It sounded big. The footfalls sounded heavy as it ran. I don't think it was a person. The brush and fallen logs would have made it almost impossible to run that fast in the dark. You would have eaten dirt from tripping. I don't think it was an animal either, though. How would it know to stop moving when we stopped talking? We packed up right then and there and got the hell out. We never returned to the campsite for an overnight again, but still sometimes stopped to check it out. I shudder to think what would have happened if we decided to stay overnight.